Hey guys, today we are going to be starting Unit 7 with the beginning of the Civil War. We've already actually talked about the first shots of the war at Fort Sumter. Today we're going to look at kind of the strengths and the weaknesses of both sides, how they are both approaching the war, and then the first actual bloodshed. So, a battle where it's clear that this war is going to actually involve people dying, and it's going to go on for a while. So let's first start off just by looking kind of at the two sides. So we'll start off with the Union. The advantages that the Union has, and again, whenever we say Union, we really mean like the United States, right? All of the states that did not secede. So in the Union, the advantages are more people and more troops, right? They have a bigger population, which means that they have more people to serve in the army. They also have more factories, which means they can produce more weapons, right? Because the Industrial Revolution is what was happening on up there. And then they also have more money. They have all the money of the federal government, and they also have more railroads. So that's all going to help them move like people and goods and products and things like that around. They also have the advantage of the Navy, the United States Navy, which the Confederacy is going to have to build theirs from scratch. And they have some good leadership. Lincoln turns out to be a really good wartime president. He is pretty good at strategies and coordinating the war effort. And then later on, we'll talk about General Grant, who eventually is going to become president after Lincoln. That's going to be later on. And then also a general named General Sherman. So there are some good leaders. There are some bad leaders, though, on the disadvantages side. We'll introduce a guy today, General McClellan. He was too cautious. He was too averse to risk. And in wartime, you kind of need to, take some risks to see some reward. But anyway, so we'll talk about McClellan a little bit later on. But you also see in the North that not everyone agrees on the war, on if it should be fought, on what it should be fought about, on how long it should go on how to treat the southern states. I mean, there was a lot of internal disagreement among the people living in the North about the war in general. And if your home population isn't really behind the war effort, that's going to make it harder to fight the war. So let's look at the Confederacy. So they have more skilled military leaders. Actually, when you look at like the generals on the Union and on the Confederacy side who went to West Point, which is this prestigious military university, it turns out that more of the Confederate generals actually have West Point degrees, as well as were higher ranked in the class rankings in West Point. So actually, you have a pretty like strong military leadership base for the South, which is going to help them out a lot. People like General Lee, up here, Robert E. Lee, people like Stonewall Jackson. So that's definitely a plus for the Confederacy. They also have the inspirational quote unquote cause on their side. Not inspirational as in like we should all, support what they were fighting for. What I'm saying by inspirational is they were inspired by it, right? So the men who were fighting felt like they had a cause to defend, which is going to help kind of pull them through some of the times where they're losing pretty bad. Kind of think about it in terms of like the American Revolution, right? Where like the colonists had something to fight for, and so it kind of kept them fighting. Same thing here. The Confederacy feels like they have something to fight for, so it's going to keep inspiring them. And they also have home turf advantage. Most of the battles happen in the South, which can be a negative too because it destroys their land that we'll talk about later. But also, they kind of know the land, they know the ins and the outs, they know the weather, they know the climate, the terrain, and that can kind of help them. Some disadvantages for the South are that they have less troops because they have less people. They have fewer weapons because they don't have the manufacturing and the factory capabilities. They have less money and they have less food because on their land, they haven't been growing food. They've been growing things like cotton. So they just don't have the access to food like the North does. Also, the way they set up their government structure is a confederation, which basically just means that there's not a lot of unity among the states. And so this lack of communication and unity among those states in the Confederacy is going to cause some confusion, and then eventually it's going to help kind of bring down their country, essentially. Okay, so let's talk about how each side kind of planned to win this war. So the Union, pretty early on, comes up with this plan called the Anaconda Plan, named after the snake, which is the way that they envision defeating the Confederacy. So the Anaconda Plan has three parts, and the three parts have to be done in order. Um, Before we go through those parts, though, let's talk about why it's called the Anaconda Plan. Think about how a snake kills its prey, right? It like circles around its prey, it tightens and tightens and tightens until eventually its prey is suffocated. That's essentially what the Union wants to do to the South. So the first thing they do is they blockade the southern ports. So they set up ships along the coast, so that way no goods can get in or out from the South. This is going to stop trade. The second thing they want to do is they want to capture the Mississippi River, which is right here, because that is going to divide the Confederacy into two halves, kind of like divide and conquer, right? And also, the Mississippi River was an important trading route. And so, if the Union can have that, they can use that trading route instead of the Confederacy. And lastly, they want to capture Richmond, which was the Confederate capital. Think about like when you are playing like a video game or capture the flag or whatever. If you capture your enemy's headquarters, the game is kind of over, right? You've made it to the end. So they want to capture Richmond to signal that the Confederacy has been defeated. So we'll kind of trace throughout this unit the Anaconda Plan and when the Union is making these three different steps. Now, the Confederacy doesn't really have a fancy plan. They mostly just want to defend their land and keep the Union fighting long enough to drain the Union resources. Because if you look down here, most of the battles are happening in the South, so they just really need to be on the defense and then go on the offense, invade the North if they can. Both sides tried to get the help from European countries like Great Britain. However, both sides failed to get that. The South thought that they could get the help of Great Britain because the cotton trade, they knew that Great Britain needed cotton. Well, eventually Great Britain found that, hey, cotton grows really well in India. And this is kind of when Great Britain starts to colonize and imperialize India. And they were like, you know what, Confederacy, we don't need to. And then the North, the Union, thought they could get the help of the British because the British had abolished slavery. And the North was like, hey, like, we're not fighting to keep slavery. You should help us. In the end, though, Great Britain and other European countries were like, go for it, America, destroy yourself from within. They're essentially laughing at America during the Civil War. Okay, so let's look at the first bloodshed of the Civil War. So it's been a few months since Fort Sumter. I guess Fort Sumter was in April, so this is in July. So yeah, a few months later. And this is known as the First Battle of Bull Run. There is going to be a second Battle of Bull Run. It's also sometimes known as the Battle of Manassas because it happens near a town called Manassas. Bull Run refers to a creek that this happened near. But basically, it is between Richmond and DC. Both sides are kind of trying to make it to the other side's headquarters. And they meet at Bull Run. And they kind of assume that the battle is going to be quick, like no one's really going to die. The shots are going to be more of like a symbol than it's actually going to be like a real battle. But what actually ends up happening is that both sides start shooting and people start falling on the ground. Both sides are really kind of surprised by this. They're like, oh my gosh, this is like a real battle. Like we're actually going to kill each other. So a lot of people were hurt, a lot of people were killed. And in the end, the Union troops retreated. They went north. And if you're going backwards in war, right, you're not going forwards. If you're going backwards, then you're losing. So technically, it's a Confederate victory here. But really, the consequences of this battle are what it shows both sides. It proves that the war is going to be long and it is going to be bloody. It is not going to be quick and it's not going to be painless. Because both sides kind of were like, oh, this war will be short and my side will win and it will be great. This battle shows, no, people are going to die and it's going to be like brothers killing brothers and it's going to be really bad. It's also after this battle that Lincoln appoints General George McClellan to lead the Union Army. And so we will talk more about George McClellan in a few other objectives, because eventually he's going to get fired because he is too cautious and he is too scared to take any risks. But for now, he's in charge of the Union Army.